Welcome everybody to Podcast Thursday, Survival Discussions. I'm your host, Craig Peddle, and I'm also the founder of PTSDzone.org, which is a not-for-profit designed to help people just like you, just like me. People who've been suffering either recently or for decades, like I have, with post-traumatic stress or an occupational stress injury. And the intention of this podcast is pretty simple. Open up the comments to y'all out there, and you can ask questions of us. You can ask questions of me in particular if you like, and we can move forward with some things that work for me on the road to recovery and some things that might work for you that might help our viewers on their road to recovery. A little bit about myself. I've just recently retired from policing in Canada. 30 years. I joined in December 1989. So over 30 years ago, I joined the Metropolitan Toronto Police Force, then the Toronto Police Service, and I finished up the last decade, 12 years, with a rural police agency in Northern Ontario, and it's been a journey, let me tell you. Would I trade it for the world? Absolutely not. I remember being a kid, and having grown up reading. I love to read. I still love to read. I love to do jumbles. I love to do puzzles. Probably atypical of most police officers, most military people. They really like the whodunit of it all, or how do we get there of it all. So I have over 3 decades of law enforcement experience. I grew up in Toronto in a place called Malvern, and it's really seen its changes over the decades. And we can get into that maybe in a later podcast when we bring in a gang expert to come and talk to us about some of the heartbreak and some of the successes that they see on a daily basis, a weekly basis. I was a young police officer when I first unknowingly was afflicted with an occupational stress injury, or PTS, and I carried it around for the better part of 29 years. It wasn't until a few years ago that a colleague of mine said to me, Craig, why don't you reach out and speak to somebody? I was always too brave. I was always too humble. There was a lot of stigma at the time in policing, and it's unique not just to policing. It's the same in the military. It's the same in the spectrum of emergency services. And there's a certain stigma attached to coming forward and saying, I think I need a little bit of help. I think I have, maybe some challenges, some problems, let's be honest. And I'm having problems with this. I'm having problems sleeping. I'm having problems with addiction. I'm having problems with interacting the way I used to when I was younger. So it all started about 29 years ago for me, when I was just a young police officer in Scarborough, which is a suburb of Toronto. And from there, I didn't spend much time in uniform. I was put into the detective stream of things very early in my career. And I spent most of my career in detective services. So I worked in investigation services, I worked in detective services, I worked in street crime. I'm an original co-founder of the Gun and Gang Task Force in Toronto, which started as a pilot project. A few subject matter experts were called upon by the chief of police then to put their best ideas and learned ideology around criminal street gangs and organized crime to help deal with. Then at the time, Toronto was having a great influx of violent crime, particularly with firearms. So shortly thereafter, myself and a couple colleagues, we created the Ontario Gang Investigators Association, which is the first non-American gang association that was accepted into the National Alliance of Gang Investigators in the United States, which is a network of gang cops, for lack of a better term. So that the Ontario Gang Investigators Association has been around now for 22 years. This November coming, 2023, they'll be having their 22nd conference, if you can believe that. Where does the time go? So I paralleled my career operating that not-for-profit, which was created, and I worked in community response unit, I worked in youth services, I worked in community policing, I worked in intelligence services, I worked at investigative support and professional standards, or IAB for our American friends, and I was a surveillance officer there, an investigator. I was also an investigator and a supervisor in wiretap investigations, and I assisted the homicide squad with multiple investigations during lateral assignments, including, of course, criminal gang cases, for which I'm a subject matter expert. The relationship I have to violent offenders, I will say, is a good one. We learned some things along the way, and I can reflect now and say that a lot of it has to do with my undiagnosed trauma that I had, in that, you got to have an empathetic edge and an empathetic manner about you when you're speaking with gang members who a lot of times are young men or men who carry weapons, specifically knives, homemade weapons, explosives at times, knives. So when one is to, debrief or interview them, it always resonated with me, and I didn't know why then, but I know why now, that they carry trauma. And it wasn't until we realized that in the Gun and Gang Task Force that everybody has their story to tell, the age-old saying, everybody has their own story to tell. And the perception of a lot of police officers at the time was, screw them, they're violent, they victimize people. But we had to take a step back in reality to discover that trauma is a psychological condition that affects everybody. It really does. So whether it's the inability or the unwillingness to grieve properly, whether it's not getting help when you realize that you might have been impacted in a negative way with an event that you were involved in, notwithstanding the fact that these are generally pretty bad people. But the one thing that we all had in common was that we were all human, right? So yes, there are egregious crimes, oftentimes they're homicidal crimes. Goes without saying, it's deplorable activity, and the victims, oftentimes really hurt in their own abilities to deal with traumas that they were dealing with the loss of a loved one or a friend or a colleague or a fellow student. Those were really some things that I learned along the way, kind of mid-career. And just a matter of reference point, I've been investigating gang culture and gang members and gangs since about 1995 or so. I was the first operational gang coordinator for the Toronto Police Service, and I've authored and assisted with implementing strategic plans, tactical plans, operational and community plans regarding the gangs provincially. And I also was instrumental with the Solicitor General of Canada in helping to develop the first criminal organization Canadian federal law on the topic of organized crime. So that's something that I'm rather proud of. I'm also a recipient of the Exemplary Police Medal for outstanding police service. I've been advanced trainer and instructor for decades. I've assisted with training tens of thousands of people, and some of my greatest memories are meeting some of you who may be watching, meeting people who really want to learn about certain topics. And that's what brings us here today to this podcast and the future podcasts. Podcast Thursday, survival discussions. So this podcast is going to be something that we'll put out every Friday, Saturday, Thursday if we can would be ideal, right? But the idea behind this, or the ideology behind this, is to offer some discussion around occupational stress injuries, traumas, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not a big fan of the D at the end of disorder, but we'll soften it with Podcast Thursday, survival discussions. We'll make the D the discussion word. And I think time and talk, as a colleague once said to me, time and talk are two of those things that we do a lot of when we're working, people who are in public service. But we don't offer the same introspection that we offer through our observations for other people. So for example, if we go to a call, or if you're dealing with a village, or if you're dealing with someone who's a victim of crime, oftentimes we help them see the positive in what they can do moving forward, the positive in what they can do to help heal, or help a colleague heal, or a friend or family member heal. But oftentimes we don't use those same gifts that we offer people, those same experiences, those same training that we offer people. So it can be a challenge for us, and thus the stigma that comes along with it. So we're oftentimes very afraid. I know that I was very reluctant. I've been called a humble person. I've been called a person with great humility, two complimentary adjectives that have been used to describe me. But I think that humbleness got in the way, where no, I'm okay. Everything will be just fine. I can get through this myself. After the incident in particular that we'll get into in another episode perhaps, I was told take some time off. But then of course you get the phone call a day or two later saying, how long are you going to be off? When are you coming back? We're short, we need you. So while complimentary, I think times have changed. For the most part, times have changed, and there's starting to be a greater understanding of what an occupational stress injury, or PTS, is, where military and law enforcers and people in the general public suffer every single day, just like we do. So this is going to be hopefully a little bit of fun along the way, and hopefully we'll be able to get some quality guests on. So drop it in the comments if you have somebody that you'd love to see us interview here on Podcast Thursday. And if you'd like a topic of discussion brought up, we can also do that too. And I'm going to use some of my lessons that I've learned along the way in discussing with you, maybe some tools, some tips, some tricks, and let's help the continuum of revolutionizing and pioneering help from others. And if I can be of any assistance to anybody, drop it in the comments. And you can also visit ptsdzone.org, ptsdzone.org, and you can find all about the PTSD Zone organization there. And we're having our first conference, our flagship send-off, our maiden voyage, so to speak. We'll be having that at the end of May in Ajax, Ontario, Canada. That's also on the website that's in the description below. You can check that out. And we look forward to some meaningful discussion, some meaningful topics, and what you see is what you get. I think that for so long, people who have been reluctant to come forward sometimes just need to see a familiar face. They need to hear an empathetic voice. They need to say, hey, you know what? I'm not alone. Those aren't just words that the government gives us. Those aren't just words that doctors and our spouses or our friends or our workmates give us. That truly you're not alone. You're truly not alone. And I'm very thankful to my friend who told me years ago, Craig, why don't you go talk to somebody, as I previously mentioned. And that has made all the difference. So hopefully moving forward through Podcast Thursday, survival discussions, that we can put our finger on some things that are topical, our fingers on things that make you scratch your head and say, what's that all about? I can't believe they're doing that, or I can't believe they're doing this, or I'm thankful they're doing that. How do I get involved? So if you want to get involved, subscribe to us, hit the like button, And we look forward to speaking with you very soon. And remember, you're not alone. You are not alone. They aren't just words. You're not alone. All right, take care until next time.